which I'm going to do right now. And so we'll share at the end of this, we'll email out the recording along with our slides so you can have those to refer back to. Wonderful. All right, well, without further delay, I'll hand it over to Blazy.
All right, thanks, Lindsay. So to get started today, what we want to do is just kind of set the groundwork with some guiding questions. And these questions are based on the sort of questions that we often see from students who have been suspended, as well as from those students' parents. So the first major question we get is, what is suspension anyway? Like, what does that mean? What are the implications of suspension? And how did we even get to this point? What did that process look like? And then the next thing we'll look at is, what is continuing education? So if your student was recently placed on academic suspension, they likely received some sort of notice from their college pointing them to continuing education as an option. So we're going to take a little bit of time to look at what CE is, how much it costs, how does it work. We'll get into all of those mechanics. And then the other chunk of the presentation, we really want to focus on supporting students. So how can you, as the student support team or a member of the student support team, really jump in and support students? And also, like, what are some resources that you should be aware of that we can provide here on campus and in the Boulder community to help support your student? So with that, we're going to jump straight into the nuts and bolts, get into the nitty gritty of the policies, the processes of suspension and continuing education. So first of all, academic standing on this campus can be a little bit confusing. And the reason for that is each college on campus has its own set of criteria, its own policies for how academic standing works, what the GPA requirements are, how students reinstate to main campus. But what's nice is all of these policies essentially fall into the same sort of framework. So we're going to take a moment to look at that framework. And I think that's helpful because in order to understand what suspension is, it'll be helpful to know how we got to suspension. So we're going to start with the warning statuses on this campus. So if a student is placed on academic alert, which is the first of the possible warning statuses, it means that the student, after their very first semester at CU Boulder, didn't hit whatever GPA threshold their college is looking for. So for instance, if their college says you have to have a 2.0 to be in good academic standing, and the student completed their very first semester with 1.7, well, they're below that threshold. So that means that they would have received a notification saying, hey, you're on an alert. We need you to hit this threshold by the end of that alert semester. So that second semester, the student should be working towards hitting the new GPA threshold. Academic probation and academic recovery. Well, I guess first of all, these two terms refer to essentially the same thing, but different colleges will use the terminology different. So you may hear probation and another college may tell their students recovery. But essentially it's very similar to alert, but it's something that we use when we're talking about students who are continuing, meaning it's not their first semester. It may be semester 5 and their cumulative GPA falls below 2.0. And now they're getting a recovery notice. And so it's the same sort of thing where they say, okay, you've been placed on academic recovery. By the end of this recovery semester, we want your GPA to be here at this new level. So if a student is in one of these warning categories and they don't raise their GPA to that new threshold by the end of the semester, then they are placed on academic suspension. An academic suspension means that a student is no longer eligible for main campus classes. Now, with that said, these students can still enroll in continuing education coursework. And actually in the summertime, they can enroll in kind of whatever they want, continuing ed or main campus. And that's just because we try to keep the summer open to all students, regardless of academic standing, just as kind of an extra pathway to help students have another option for reinstatement. So when students are on suspension, they still have certain criteria that they have to meet each semester. And again, this will vary college to college, but most colleges will say, okay, you're on suspension and you're enrolling in continuing education coursework. Each semester you do that, we want you to have a 2.5 semester GPA, or some colleges will say we want you to have a 2.3 semester GPA. So if a student hits that mark, then that's great. The next semester they can keep going with continuing ed until they raise their GPA enough to reinstate to main campus. If they don't hit that semester GPA requirement, then the student would be placed on academic dismissal. And academic dismissal means that now the student is no longer eligible for continuing education, fall and spring coursework. Once again, though, anyone can enroll in summer classes. So that's continuing ed and main campus summer, regardless of academic standing. So that's still an option for the student. So I just want to pause and acknowledge that academic dismissal can sound really scary, but it is not designed to be punitive. Dismissal is designed to stop a student from digging a hole that's too deep for them to be able to climb out of. A number of years ago, the colleges were not enforcing the academic dismissal policy. And I remember I met with a student who we did a GPA calculation to see like, okay, how many credits of B average coursework do you need to get to 2.0? She needed 120 credits at a B average to get back to 2.0 so that she could reinstate and go back to main campus. 120 credits is a full, it's a full degree's worth of credits. And that's not a good place to be in. So in my mind, academic dismissal is a really, really helpful tool to stop students from getting to that point. The other thing is, and I think academic suspension does this as well, but it kind of forces the students to pause a little bit and reevaluate and say, okay, something hasn't been working. What can I do differently? How can I make some changes so that I can reinvest in my academics? The reason why I say academic suspension does this as well is if we look back at these warning statuses, these statuses look the same as what the previous semester was, right? To the student, the student's day to day, they're still on main campus classes, they're doing everything the same way they have been doing it potentially. And when everything looks the same, except that at the start of the semester, you got a notice saying, hey, you're on alert. It can be easy for a student who is maybe anxious about that and not ready to face that reality and not ready to evaluate things to just ignore the alert that they received and just keep plugging along doing the same thing they've been doing. But once students are on suspension and they're in continuing ed classes, everything looks a little bit different. And that can help a student stop and say, okay, like everything's a little different now. How do I get back to main campus coursework? How do I reinvest in my academics and get back into good academic standing? And so sometimes that change can be a really powerful tool in helping students make that next step towards recovery. So then, of course, reinstatement. This is ultimately what we're here for. We want to learn about suspension, but with the goal of reinstatement. So for most colleges, the reinstatement policy is just about the cumulative GPA, where they'll say, okay, a student just needs to raise their CU cumulative GPA to 2.0, or for engineering, 2.25. For business, the lead school of business wants to make sure that students have a 2.0 in their business classes as well. So there's always a little bit of nuance in there. But once a student hits that requirement, then they are allowed to reinstate to main campus. So in order to get to that requirement, the most common options that students will choose is to enroll in continuing ed coursework and maybe even some main campus summer coursework. Now, there is another option for a lot of colleges, and that's to reinstate with what we call a virtual GPA. So a virtual GPA means, let's say a student is placed on suspension and they decide that it would actually be better for them to go back home and enroll in classes at a local community college. If they do that, they can transfer the classes back, but the GPA doesn't transfer back. So the CU GPA remains the same. But for the purposes of reinstatement, a lot of colleges on campus will say, we are happy to add in those grades, do a manual calculation and see if we add these grades in, does that bring you to a 2.0? And if so, then yes, you can reinstate. Now, again, this isn't an option for every college. So we would encourage students to meet with their main campus advisor to see if this is something that works for them. And some colleges, like for instance, engineering, can do a GPA calculation, but they really want to be able to pre-approve the coursework first. So you'd need to be really proactive about that option. So as we're talking about options, you'll see we're talking about continuing ed, virtual GPA, going to another college. Well, what even is continuing ed, right? We hear from a lot of parents who are concerned about continuing ed because at most universities, continuing education is a place where retirees go to enroll in professional development, personal enrichment types of classes just for fun, which is great, but that is not our model. So continuing education at CU Boulder is essentially the wing of the university that focuses on extending the resources of the campus outside of the traditional boundaries. So by that, I mean, for instance, pre-COVID times, we were the home of online credit for CU Boulder. Obviously with COVID, everyone had to kind of learn to navigate education in some sort of online space. But prior to that, continuing education was at home. Now we also offer a number of evening credit classes. And we have classes where you could learn, to play guitar. And so, we have a number of classes through continuing ed, but unlike these other universities, these aren't just personal enrichment, like these are credit bearing classes that will count towards a CU Boulder degree. Even guitar lessons will, and you can get a letter grade for it. So all of our classes count towards CU Boulder degrees. Students receive credit for them, they receive a grade in them. CE classes will automatically appear on the transcript and on the degree audit, and it won't say anywhere that they were CE classes. They look just like regular CU classes. They will automatically calculate into the CU GPA. And all of that is so helpful because, kind of the downside to the virtual GPA option is that, like if you reinstate on a virtual GPA, well, now you're not really in good standing. You're just in a probationary status. You can do main campus again. You've got a limited time to raise that CU GPA. Whereas if you go to the continuing ed route and you reinstate, well, your CU GPA is already up there where it needs to be now. The other thing is you don't have to worry about like, will this class transfer over? How do I transfer my classes? All of it's automatic. It's all just part of the CU system. The other big question we get about continuing education is about the cost. If you were to look at the classes.colorado.edu course search, you would see, you could pull up a continuing ed class and you'd see a note saying like, warning, extra cost associated with this class. That's only true sometimes. So essentially, like if a student is enrolled in, say, just a bunch of main campus classes, and they see this continuing ed class that they want to throw into the mix, they can do that, but we're financially separate from the main campus, meaning that extra class will have tuition assessed for it in addition to whatever they're already paying to the main campus. Now, if we're talking about suspended students who are only eligible for continuing ed classes, that extra cost is on top of the $0 you're paying to the main campus. So it's not extra at all. Our tuition is based on arts and sciences rates. So it should be pretty similar to what you normally see. And in fact, it might be a little bit cheaper because I know arts and sciences is a little more affordable than, say, engineering or business. The other thing is, if a student enrolls in all continuing ed online credit, so asynchronous classes, we always assess that tuition at the in-state rates. So, in that case, it could be significantly cheaper for folks. But if you're thinking about doing that, we would also want to think about, whether an asynchronous format, and especially a full load of asynchronous classes, is actually the best fit for your student, because some students really need that face-to-face time. So we want to weigh cost with the student's needs and the student's learning style. Because if we don't do that, what could happen is, yes, the tuition is more affordable, but the grades are lower too. And that's not helpful. So we just want to make sure that we have a good balance in there. So what I would recommend in those cases is just make sure you're working with an academic advisor, because we can work together on identifying what types of classes are the best fit for a student. We can also look at the student's specific college requirements because like I said, every college approaches suspension and probation and all these things a little bit differently. So we can dive into those specific requirements to see what exactly your student needs to do. We can also talk about other ways that students can raise their GPA, like the grade replacement policy can be a great way to raise a GPA more quickly than just enrolling in whatever. We can also help students figure out how many credits of B they would need to get to 2.0, so that calculation that I mentioned earlier about my student who needed 120 credits of B, that calculation is really powerful because you may look at a GPA and think, oh my gosh, like that GPA is so low, but if it's just based on one semester, it might not take that long to raise it. If it's based on 8 semesters, it could take a very, very long time to raise it. So if we do this B down calculation is what we call it, that gives us an opportunity to just figure out like what's a really tangible, concrete goal that we can latch on to here. One thing though that I want to mention about academic advisors is we do have some limitations on how much information we can share. And you may have encountered this already, but because of FERPA privacy laws, we can't share any information about a student's academic record with anyone other than the student. Now, the student could fill out a FERPA waiver form and they could list you as someone that we're allowed to talk to. And if they do that, they would also list a password that you would have to give us. So if your student tells you they filled out the FERPA form, make sure they also tell you the password so that we can actually talk to you about it. With that said, though, I also just want to point out that we can still discuss a lot of things without digging into your student's record. If you're trying to figure out like, well, my student was suspended from business, but they don't even like business and now they want, arts and sciences, how do we make that change? We can have that discussion without having to pull up the specifics of a student's record. So then, as we're talking about advising, this kind of brings up another question that we get a lot in continuing ed, specifically from students who have just received a suspension notice. And that question is, well, who do I talk to? Like, do I have to talk to a continuing ed advisor? Because as Lindsay said, we are all here from continuing education advising. Students oftentimes think that they're not allowed to see their main campus advisor. So what I always say is you should see both of us. Like your main campus advisor really knows the specifics about your major requirements. And if you were thinking about transferring in coursework, you're really going to want to make sure that you're connecting with your main campus advisor to ensure that that coursework isn't just transferring, but it's also then applying to the requirement that you're expecting it to apply to. Your main campus advisor can also talk to you about the college's specific academic standing requirements, like do they need a 2.25? Do you have to raise your major GPA? What does this look like? Continuing education advising, we're here to help as well. We can talk about things that are specific to continuing ed. We know these instructors. We've seen success rates in various CE classes. We can talk about the modalities. We can do that calculation I mentioned earlier. And we can talk about other continuing ed specific resources like the Composition Hub, which is an online writing center that we put together that's just free and available to students taking continuing ed classes. So we can help kind of work through those CE specific questions. The other thing that continuing ed advisors can do is just talk to and about students in academic difficulty. We work with students in this situation all day, every day. So we've seen, strategies that have been successful in the past. We've seen resources that have been successful for students in the past. So we're happy to talk with folks about how to support their student in academic difficulty. I always tell students and also their parents that they can think of continuing ed advisors as supplemental advisors. You can always meet with us and we're here to help you in addition to your main campus resources and advising that you already have. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Graham, and he and Jess are going to spend a little bit of time talking about how you can help support your student and how we can help with that as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Blazy. I appreciate that. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about how you can help support your student, and then of course how we can help as well. So one of the first keys to I think, to helping support students is communication, and being willing and ready to listen. Actually, if we have that next slide, we should pop that one up. Let's see, there we go. So the communication part of it is super important. And as you probably already are aware, your students may not be ready to talk about this yet. This communication can be pretty challenging. This can be difficult conversations, but if you stay willing and able and ready to listen when they're ready to talk about it, that communication can really be the start of a new academic journey for them and helping them get back on their feet. There's some aspects with that communication too that can kind of help. And one is motivational interviewing. And I'm not going to get into it right now, but I do want to put a plug in. After this this webinar, we're going to send out a thank you email and also try to gauge some interest. And if there's enough interest in having a specific presentation for parents designed around motivational interviewing techniques and kind of how you can help your student navigate change, and help you understand where they're at in terms of changing their, some of their behaviors, then we can absolutely set up a presentation like that. But I want to make sure there's enough interest. So look out for an email about that, and we'll get that site up for going. But in the meantime, certainly feel free to Google it, because it's a fascinating topic, and a lot of advisors use it on campus to help students kind of change some behaviors. Okay, so obstacles. There can be any number of obstacles and things that are getting in the way of your student being successful, and you can help them identify those. 9 times out of 10, a student knows what's getting in the way. They know what's that obstacle for them, and that conversation and that communication around those obstacles can really help them identify that and start thinking about, well, is this something that I can control? Is it outside of my control? And do I need additional resources or support for this? A lot of our additional resources and support are available through CU Boulder, and we'll send out more links in the follow-up email on this as well. But everything from our CAPS program to career services, to all sorts of other resources that can really help a student overcome those obstacles. And then another thing that you can help to do is to help explore those options together. And there are a ton of options. You're going to hear this a lot through continuing ed. That's kind of our mantra a little bit, is we have a lot of options. Sometimes when students are placed on suspension, they feel like they don't have any options anymore. And that can be further from the truth. There's still a lot of options out there, including continuing education courses. Blaise talked a little bit about enrolling at a community college or another institution. And more than that, we live in a day and age where there are so many educational opportunities out there and available to students that it can be overwhelming, and we can help students kind of explore those. So let's go on to the next slide. So another thing that we talk a lot about in continuing ed, and specifically in one of our courses that we teach that we'll talk about in a few minutes, are SMART goals. So if you haven't heard of SMART goals, it's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals. So a lot of times when we talk to a student in academic difficulty, we say, okay, what do you hope to achieve this semester? And very often the answer is, I want to raise my GPA. And that's great, that they should want to raise their GPA, but that's not a SMART goal. It's not specific. It's kind of measurable. But if an easy way to tweak that into a SMART goal is to say, I want to get a term GPA of 2.5. It's specific, it's measurable, it is achievable, it's relevant to their situation, and it's time bound, because the semester of course ends. It's you have all of those. So if you hear your students say, I want to raise my GPA, it's like, okay, let's make that more specific, and that can be really helpful. This next one is probably pretty hard, but try to be patient and flexible. Your students are navigating a lot of change, and it can be pretty overwhelming. And of course, given the last year of everybody's lives and all the change we had to navigate, I think patience and flexibility is something that we've all had a lot of practice with. So try to keep that in mind as you help your students through this challenging time. And by helping them, you can help them in a couple of different ways, by staying involved, but letting them take the lead. There's this idea of self-authorship with education, and that students need to really become the authors of their own journey. And by helping them take the lead, that can be really beneficial. I don't have college age kids, but I do have young children, and it's my tendency to, when they experience a problem, I just want to jump right in there and help solve it for them. and say, oh no, do this, do that. And that's not always helpful. So encourage them to take the lead. And then the next thing I'd like to talk a little bit about is career advising. And I'm going to pass over to Jessica in just a second. She can talk more about the specific services and resources that we offer. So let's keep going on to the next slide, and then we'll get to our career advising. So we got a few more resources for you. So as Blazy mentioned, academic advising. We are supplemental academic advisors for your student. We can help connect them to resources and support on campus, including faculty. If your student is having a hard time communicating with a faculty member, sometimes we can kind of be an intermediary a little bit and help them start that conversation, and then help them connect with other offices as well. Sometimes it's good just to have a regular check-in with an advisor, and we can do that as well. If a student says, hey, look, I just need some accountability, we can check in with them, once a week, every other week, something like that. So they have a regular cadence of getting connected with an advisor, whether there's something pressing that they need to talk about, or whether it's more of just how things are going. Those regular check-ins can be beneficial. We also have an academic skills resource course, which is the screenshot over here. So this is an online course delivered through our learning management system. It's through Canvas. And when a student's placed on academic suspension, we automatically enroll them into this academic skills resource. And it has a ton of videos on everything from time management to study skills and strategies to getting connected with other campuses or other offices on campus, and a lot of other things that can really help them be a successful student. So this will pop up in your student's campus account if they're placed on suspension. And we're excited about it. It's been a pretty neat resource and fun to develop, and we'll keep adding more content to it as we go along. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about this later, but we have a new program starting this fall. It's the Continuing Education Academic Resiliency and Reinstatement Program. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So another question, and this is something that you may have already talked to your student about, or maybe not, but what about taking some time off? And when this part of the conversation comes up with a student, I'm usually really supportive of it, because I had an experience when I was a student where I needed to take some time off, and to this day, I think it was probably the single best decision I made in my undergraduate career. The second best, or maybe the other part of that good decision, was deciding to come back and finish out the degree. But a lot of times the students think, they're thinking about taking time off. The tendency is like, oh, what, you're dropping out of college. And it's not that. It's stopping out. It's taking a break. It's reassessing. And if you have a plan for returning, it can be really beneficial. Some of the things that you can do if you're going to take some time off is to really try to stay connected with the university through advisors. We will still be an advisor for a student, even if they're not taking classes. If you have a particular faculty member you're connected with, or enjoying their classes, send them an email, stay connected with them. The CU community, if you have friends here, stay connected so that you have those other forms of connection to help bring you back to CU when you're ready. And then another thing to keep in mind is, if you're taking time off, is try to make that time off meaningful through work, volunteer, travel, reading, other educational opportunities, everything from Coursera to community college, or other ways where you can kind of continue to explore all the different educational opportunities that are out there, but really make it meaningful. And then throughout that time off, always, again, feel free to make an advising appointment. We can help you navigate what it looks like to come back to see you. So now I want to pass it over to Jess, and she's going to talk a little bit about career advising.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Jess Talbot, and I am the career advisor with the Division of Continuing Education. And I always think it's helpful just to introduce, when should somebody meet with a career advisor? And this could be somebody that's entering into their first time in academics as an undergrad, and it could be also somebody that's exploring careers later down the road. But really, there's a couple of key topics that are really common to chat about in career advising. I think the biggest thing is to remember that this is really meant to be individualized support in helping students or anybody really identify what goals they might have, and also what they need to do to work towards those goals. And even if somebody hasn't really figured out exactly what that goal is, that's okay too, because the other piece of this can be some long discussion about major and career exploration. So understanding what is the best fit for you, and is that at CU Boulder? Is that somewhere else? Somebody brought a question in the chat as far as maybe exploring vocational or technical college, or even other possibilities that are out there where maybe the traditional like 4-year degree, it doesn't necessarily make sense. So working with students really to understand what is the best fit for you. And there's a lot of ways to do this, but what I really like to focus on is understanding what somebody's interests are, their values, strengths and aptitudes, their motivations, and their skills. And then of course, identifying, where are some congruence there with a career and a major, and if not, like what are other areas outside of that might be beneficial to pursue, like volunteer work or hobbies, for example. And then additionally, also helping with looking and seeking an internship or a job. So this could be just the strategies to employ, writing a strong resume and cover letter, and also preparing for interviews. So career advising can help with all of those things. And then the last thing is assessment options. So these are always just completely optional, but they can be helpful with somebody that's maybe trying to expand that self-knowledge to have like that assessment piece be able to help somebody identify like, what are my interests? What's my personality preference? What are my strengths, for example? Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And I always like to show this slide too, just because I think sometimes students, even from what I hear in conversations, they put a lot of pressure on picking like the quote unquote right major for their goals. And one thing I like to show is what really employers are looking for. And this survey is put together each year by the National Association of Colleges and Employers. And so they send out the survey to a couple of thousand employers, and they usually get a couple hundred responses back. And the goal is to identify like, what is this wish list of skills that employers want to see when they're hiring for a position or when they're reviewing a resume. And I like to point out that a lot of these skills are what we would call more soft skills. So communication skills is a huge one, right? Written, verbal, interpersonal skills, and then also just be reminding students that they can gain all of these soft skills, and every degree program at CU Boulder will teach these. And then also identifying other experiences outside of school that could really help them develop these skills. So maybe it's focusing on an internship or a job, a part-time job even, or even volunteering or getting involved with a student club on campus to develop those leadership skills and these other really valuable and desirable skills that employers are looking for. And so a lot of times I work with students around picking a major will be, let's really look at what are you interested in? What makes you, what do you enjoy reading? And what do you feel like you're really strong at in the classroom? And so identifying a major that they feel like they can be successful and empowered, and then identifying what they could do outside of that even to pursue a particular career, for example. So a lot of our discussion is just on, finding what major makes sense for you and what's the best fit. And then of course, identifying what else they can do outside of that with their work in career advising. And then the last slide here for career advising is for those students on suspension, they really have two options for career support. So they are welcome to work with me in continuing education. So I offer one-on-one appointments with students that are on academic suspension. And then they can also meet with main campus career services. So that office, they offer career support for all degree seeking students. So anybody that's pursuing a degree, whether they're on academic suspension or not, and also for alumni. So one quick plug I would say is that all alumni of CU Boulder can work with career services as long as they want to. So that's something that will be available for lifelong. The other thing that's a little bit unique about career services is they use an embedded model. So they actually have assigned career advisors for the different schools and programs and majors. So that's something just to let your student know. And in addition to one-on-one meetings, they also offer group meetings and group workshops, which is nice depending on individual preferences there. And then since it's a larger office on campus, they also have a lot of on-campus events, virtual events, career fairs. So there's also a lot of opportunity there to really engage with that office, both now and then, of course, in the future. And that's all I have. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Graham.
All right, thank you, Jess. Okay, so I've mentioned this a couple of times before and earlier in the presentation, but I want to wrap it up with, before we get to questions, with the introduction of our new Resiliency and Reinstatement program. So continuing ed has long served students on suspension and academic difficulty. And this year we started thinking about some ways that we could maybe offer more services, or what else could we do? And so we developed this program. It's primarily based on research from a sociologist and professor of adult and continuing education named Jack Mesereau. He developed this transformational learning theory. He researched and studied adults returning to higher education after time away, and identified these the way that students were successful in that transformation was when they would, or in that journey, was when they really transformed their perspectives and critically analyzed some previously held assumptions that maybe no longer held true. So I want to look at the 10 phases of transformational learning just real quickly. I don't want to go through all of these, but I do want to highlight a couple of these. So the first is a disorienting dilemma. And I think that looking at just the transition from high school to college, I mean, that in and of itself can be a disorienting dilemma. So compounding that, or in addition to that, is also then experiencing academic difficulty. Students come in from high school to college and find that whatever worked for them in high school maybe doesn't work for them anymore here at CU or at other institutions of higher education. And so that creates this dilemma where they previously had this idea that they were academically successful had been reinforced based on what they were doing. But when they get here and those things are no longer working for them, they need to make a change. And that's pretty disorienting. So, and that can lead to a lot of feelings of guilt and shame. And if you haven't read any Brene Brown, definitely read Brene Brown, particularly around shame. Watch her TED Talks. And that can be a really helpful point of conversation. But these 10 phases of transformative learning are what we hope to help guide the students through during a semester in our Resiliency and Reinstatement program. Our advising conversations are going to be focused on these topics throughout the semester to help students really critically analyze some assumptions that they had prior to attending college, and how those perspectives and those views may need to change in order to start experiencing academic success. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of what this program is based on and how we're going to have those conversations. So now some kind of details of the program. So it is a cohort-based program to help students reinstate to good academic standing. There are some requirements. We'll have a student enroll in FYXP 1100. It's an academic success seminar designed for teaching academic skills. It's a credit-bearing course. It counts toward the overall 120 credit hours needed for graduation. And it's a great course. We have a really good instructor for it. And we're excited about offering it. It goes everything from, similar to our online academic skills resource, but much more involved, and it's a really good experience. We're also going to require enrollment in COM 2500 interpersonal communication. And just as a callback to what Jess showed us with those slides and what employers value, 3 of those topics and those skills were communication based. So having this enrollment in COM 2500 interpersonal communication is something that we're pretty excited about, because it's a course that's going to get a lot of the soft skills for you. And then we also want students to participate in activities and experiences that'll help further deepen their connections to CU Boulder. There's a lot of research out there that has looked at why students leave college before attaining a degree. And a lot of it points to not having developed enough connections to their institution, to their university. And those could be in social aspects, it could be in academic aspects. So we're going to really try to focus on each student and how we can help them develop further develop those connections to help them, get not only the academics, but the entire experience. The academic advising appointments will be required for the duration of the program, and we're going to use a model called intrusive advising, and it's basically where we're being really proactive, reaching out to the student and scheduling these appointments and encouraging that success. And then we also have a peer mentor who's going to be part of our program, so that's going to be another exciting aspect of it. Throughout the program, we're also going to provide additional support and resources to help students connect with any resources or support that they may need around academic, financial health, family, employment concerns. Really taking this idea that your students' experience at Boulder is not just academics. Life continues to happen when you're a student, and those things can really impact you and your ability to be successful in the classroom. So we can help connect those students. The requirements and what happens if they meet requirements. So this is something we're also really excited about. There's a $1,000 academic resiliency scholarship if all program requirements are met with a term GPA of 2.5. Now, of course, reinstatement is dependent on the college, so they may not be able to reinstate immediately following the semester in our program, but hopefully they'll be on a really strong track record at that point and be able to continue enrolled continuing ed. And our support continues throughout their time, and regardless of academic standing. So they can always schedule appointments with us. So to wrap it up, suspension is definitely not the end of your student's academic journey. A lot of times it can feel like that to the student, and we really try to convey that it is not the end at all. Your student is capable of academic success, and their journey is unique. They may compare themselves to their friends, their family, to their brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and parents and say, oh, but they were so successful, or they did this, and why am I not doing that? And that's because this is their journey, and we can help them navigate that and return to good academic standing. So yeah, I guess now it is time for questions. So I think I'll pass it back to Lindsay, and we'll take it from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks to Blazy and Graham and Jessica. There have been some questions that have come in, which is awesome. So we'll go through those, but definitely feel free to still enter some of those. Okay, there was a question about CE advising, and Blazy talked a little bit about kind of who to see, or when a good situation would be for your main campus advisor versus a continuing ed. But can you talk a little bit about how CE advising works? Does someone get an advisor assigned? That kind of thing.
Yeah, of course. That's a great question. So students are assigned to main campus advisors, but they are not assigned to continuing ed advisors, which means that they can just meet with us, and they can meet with any one of us, which we actually really like that model in particular, because if a student, their goal is to meet with someone same day, they can just look at our calendar and see, okay, who has an opening today? If they have met with someone in CE before and they want to meet with that same person, they get to prioritize that and say okay, well, this person has an opening today, but I really like that person I saw before and they're available tomorrow, so I'll schedule that. In order for a student to schedule with us, they would use Buff Portal Advising, which is the same advising portal that nearly all of the colleges on campus use. And they can also find that directly from our website. So if you go to the Continuing Ed website and you hit the Advising tab, there's a button right at the top there that says schedule an appointment with an advisor, and students can go in that way. Once they go to Buff Portal Advising, they'll just want to look for the little tile that says Continuing Education. And as they click that, they can go through and find an advisor that way. That's also how they would schedule with Jess, our career advisor. They would just change the drop-down window to say career advising.
Awesome. Thanks, Blazy. Okay, so Graham, you talked a little bit about kind of stopping out, taking a break. That can be really helpful. This is a question about, at what point do you start having a conversation about college not being a good fit, maybe, and maybe looking at other options, something like a vocational college or the military that they might be interested in instead?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. I'm afraid I may not have a great answer for it. Each conversation is unique, and each student is unique. And I think as you're having conversations with students who are experiencing academic difficulty, I mean, listening for, what they're saying about their experience can, I think, give you some pretty good guidelines on if that seems like a safe topic to bring up. Some students are not going to be willing to even consider that for a wide variety of reasons. But I think that, just listening to them and let them kind of guide you on when to have that conversation is probably how, it's how I think I approach it. And yeah, it can be a hard conversation to have. But usually framing it in the sense of that this is not any kind of end of a journey. It's a beginning and a start of something that could be really exciting for them. Can be helpful. And then I'm also always happy to meet with students and parents together so that we can kind of all talk about those options together. So if that's something that you're interested in as well, we could certainly do that.
Yeah, and I'd like to piggyback off that a little bit and just point back to what Graham was saying earlier about self-authorship. I think that's a really important piece of buy-in. And if we try to tell students like, look, maybe college isn't a good fit for you, if they're not in a space where they're ready to hear that, a lot of times what that means is they're not buying into that pathway and now they're shutting out that pathway. And oftentimes they're shutting out that resource too. When we talk to students in continuing ed for the first time, it's so common for students to say that they were anxious about coming in to see us, or they were scared to set up the appointment because they feel so bad about where they are right now. And they're worried that they're going to meet with an advisor who's going to say, maybe college isn't for you. So if we lead with that or go to that place too early, then a lot of times students will just adopt an avoidance policy instead. And rather than tapping into resources, they'll just go, all in with maybe a large set of classes that are not a great fit for them. So what we often try to do is break it down into like, okay, where are we in this moment? And what are some things we can work on? And then, sometimes over time, we can start pulling in other things like, okay, let's have you talk to career advising to start exploring like your motivations and what is it that really drives you. And then we can kind of take it from there and start having those larger conversations that way.
Awesome. Another hard one for you coming now. So there is, this person says there's an international student who is on academic suspension and says that they're most likely not going to get their GPA raised by this summer. And they're really afraid of telling their parents. They've had a lot of resources offered to them, coaching, CAPS, tutoring, office hours, kind of all the things, right, that we start with. And it sounds like they haven't really wanted to seek those resources. Any ideas, any thoughts on this one?
That's a tough one. There's probably a lot of cultural components in that. I would also assume that may be coming into play. We're always happy to talk to them. I mean, certainly say that. But if this is a hard part of it, because if students aren't willing or able to use the resources that we have on campus and that we can provide, we can't force them to do it. We can't force them to use these resources and access that. But what we can do is be willing and ready and able to help them when they're ready for that and that support. Yeah, I would say just keep those communication lines open, keep checking in with them. When students feel like somebody at the university cares about their success, that's when they can start achieving that success. So yeah, just keep those communication lines open, and hopefully they'll be ready to use those resources when and can use those resources when they're ready for them.
And sometimes it can also be helpful to just offer to be present when the student is ultimately having that conversation with their parents, even if it means that you're just there on Zoom, ready to answer questions about what that means. Because a lot of times the scary part of the conversation is also like, I don't have anyone here with me to support me, and just having that presence can be really helpful. The student might still have options though. So even if they're being placed on dismissal, if they're enrolled in continuing ed right now, and if they've maintained their immigration status, they might still have time to transfer to a community college or to the International English Center. Of course, that's just delaying things a little bit, and we're not here to just keep a student in the country. We also want to make sure that they're making progress towards something. But yeah, and we're happy to talk offline too about this specific student situation if that would be helpful.
Awesome, thank you both. Okay, a couple questions came up about the reinstatement and resiliency program. One is the FYXP 1100 course offered through CE, and if so, is a student who's dismissed from CE, are they allowed to enroll in it or in this program?
So FYXP 1100 is offered through continuing ed in both fall and spring semesters. If a student has been dismissed from continuing ed, then they're not able to enroll in continuing ed courses during fall and spring semesters, so they wouldn't be eligible to enroll in that. But if a student has been is on academic suspension from main campus and still eligible to enroll through continuing ed, then yes, they can enroll in that. And it is going to be a required part of our resiliency and reinstatement program. But Blazy, maybe you can help me here. I think we're going to have 2 sections of that course. Is that right?
Potentially. So right now we've shut the course down so that it's available to the program, and we're going to see how much interest we have in the program. And if we just have like a few folks who want to join it, that's fine. We'll just open up the class to let other folks in. If we have a lot of interest, we'll open up a second section for non-R&R program students. But our goal would be to have a dedicated section just for the students in the program so that we can really build a strong community within that class and within the, because these students would be in the comm class and have the peer mentor and everything as well. So it's required for students in the program, but it's not required for everyone on suspension.
Perfect. That was the second question. Is it required for suspended students? And it is not. It's actually, they have to apply for the program. So that's an important one.
Yeah, we'll be sending out an interest form to suspended students to see if they're interested in joining our program. And then students who are interested, we'll work with them on getting them into the program. But yeah, certainly it is not required for suspended students to enroll in the resiliency and reinstatement program. They're welcome, but it's certainly not required.
Okay, we had another question about resources. So a parent's student kind of missed that they were on academic probation or alert, whatever it was, and didn't necessarily know about the resources that were available. He's in taking summer classes now. Are there resources that he can take advantage of this summer?
Yeah, we are happy to meet with him this summer because we can start strategizing about, what might be some good options, even for the summer classes that he's in right now. We can talk to him about, how can you talk to your professors and really be present, especially if these are online or remote classes. It can feel hard to be present, but having that connection and that relationship is really powerful. We can get him connected with the academic skills resource that we developed. That's a free resource on Canvas. And students who were placed on suspension should be getting that soon. I don't know if it's actually attached to their Canvas accounts yet, but if it's not, it should be later this week, I would imagine. And we can help plan for fall. We can plan for all options, right? Like whether that's continuing ed for fall or main campus for fall, like we can look at, the various pathways that your student may end up taking. And I think it might be helpful too for us to do some GPA calculations and crunching some numbers, just so that he has a strong sense of where he is and where he needs to be aiming. Because sometimes if you just have this nebulous, like, raise my GPA, that can feel overwhelming. And so if we can come up with like a smaller, more specific target, and set a SMART goal around that, that could be really helpful. Yeah, through, so the question, sorry, Lindsay, now I'm reading question, but yeah, so the question, would this be through a continuing education advisor appointment? Absolutely, yeah. And like I said, if you go to the continuing ed website and hit advising, and then just click the schedule an appointment button, your student would be able to log in there, click the continuing ed tile and schedule that way. And there's a spot where he can even write a note saying like, I was placed on suspension, taking summer classes, I just want to learn about resources and strategies, and we can help through that.
Awesome. Okay, I think this might be our last question, but it's about office hours. So a lot of folks always say, reach out to your instructors, go to office hours. What happens if I'm scared to do that?
So the question is if we're scared to go to office hours, is that right? So I would say start with an advisor, whether it's a main campus advisor or through us here in continuing education. Yeah, start talking to us about your experience in the classroom, what it's like with, those faculty interactions. And we can, I think Blazy used the word strategize. We're pretty good at strategizing. We can figure out some good ways to approach that. And, sometimes, I get it. It is sometimes intimidating to talk to a faculty member, to a professor. I guess I would say, well, let me phrase it this way. In a previous life, I worked as an intensive English program instructor and had office hours. And it was pretty disappointing when nobody showed up to my office hours. I had to have office hours. I wanted students to come talk to me. I was there, and when they didn't show up, I was like, oh, so I think I have to assume that I am not uncommon in that. Professors have office hours. They want you to come talk to them. Whether it's about the content of the course, something you're struggling with, like this is something that they want you to do. And so, kind of keeping that in mind, that these people, and they are people, they want you to come talk to them. But yeah, certainly talk to us, and we can kind of be that intermediary a little bit and start reaching out and figure out how that might work. And then yeah, just keep in mind that they want to talk to you. They want you to come to their office hours.
Yeah, and I always tell students office hours are the loneliest hours of the week. Most professors, unless it's right before an exam, they're just sitting there, like they have to be there, so they will be there. They're hoping someone shows up, and usually no one shows up. So they're always really appreciative when students come by. The other thing is it can be helpful, especially if a student is nervous about going, if they email the professor first and say, I just want to let you know I plan to go to your office hours on Tuesday. And now they've got someone else holding them accountable for that. The other thing is, a lot of times I'll sit down with a student and say like, okay, so what sorts of things do you want to make sure that you say to your professor or ask your professor? And let's write that out. I even had a student this past semester who had really severe anxiety. And because of that, she would get to a point where she just couldn't speak. And she was like, I'm so worried that I'll go to office hours, I won't be able to speak, and I'll just start crying, and then I'm going to feel really silly. And so I just can't go to office hours. So we actually wrote up a script, and she was like, okay, so what I'm going to do is if I get to that point, I'm just going to say, I'm sorry, can I just read this, and read it to her professor. And it worked really well. And then she met with all of her professors. She got a couple of incompletes, and like everything just started turning around. And then after that, she stayed in communication with them and continued to meet in office hours throughout the semester. So we're always happy to help strategize with students.
Awesome. And Melio actually said in the comments, which I think is really true, that he was often a student who was the only one there at office hours. And that was really helpful because then he got to really get to know his professors and bond with them, which is a good point too. Some benefits to that. Okay, we have another question kind of about the implications of COVID and just how hard, fully acknowledging this year has been very, very, very difficult. And so thinking about kind of what are some of those options for students who just really struggled in this remote year, and maybe in any other circumstance wouldn't necessarily be in the situation that they're in. What's next? What do we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So CU has a few extra opportunities available to students because of COVID. So one thing is the grade replacement policy is new-ish, but usually the policy says you can only use 10 credits of grade replacement. Well, now CU said, you know what, if the class you attempted was during any of these COVID semesters, we're not even counting that towards the 10 credits that you can use towards grade replacement. So you can potentially go through and do grade replacement on just tons and tons of classes and still not hit that 10 credit max that you would normally be awarded. So that's a nice option. We also, depending on the student situation, the student might be eligible to petition to retroactively withdraw from some of their semesters. And we work with students all the time in continuing ed who, the reason why they're in academic difficulty is because life happened. And sometimes life happening is a result of COVID. And so we work with students all the time to see like, okay, what do we need to do to look at your situation, to examine like how to put together a strong retroactive withdrawal petition. And then if that petition is approved, all of those grades are just turned into W's and the GPA automatically increases from that. So we're absolutely happy to talk to students one-on-one to review their case and see what kind of where the nuance is and what options are available as a result.
Okay, wonderful. Just checking that I didn't miss anything, but I think we're all good. So thank you so much to Graham and Blazy and to Jess. Thank you all for attending. We're so glad that you could join us. Again, we're going to be sending out the slides and this presentation, the recording of it, along with a quick survey and the opportunity to sign up for that motivational interviewing that Graham mentioned too. So definitely take a look at that email. And then if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us individually. We're happy to chat and to meet with you, your student, whatever it is that you need support with right now. Wonderful. That's it for today. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.